look at somebody like Isaac Newton, he was a very religious man. He saw no conflict between religion and science, and really that is more a product of the Enlightenment era, where the people that were pro-Enlightenment, sort of denying God, tried to claim science for themselves, even though historically that hadn't been the case. The most fervent or the people that had the most to contribute to science were often very religious.
Lugano's Plan B podcast presents Bitcoin, not a cult, not anti-religion, with Jimmy Song. Do you think there is a theology behind Bitcoin? Is there a religion associated with it?
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily part of like anyone's specific theology that like Bitcoin is like something like that. It's much more just the right way of doing things, right? Like I liken it much more towards natural law. And if you're thinking in terms of natural law, what the right thing is and what the wrong thing is, the current monetary system is clearly wrong. Right? There's so many things wrong with it. There's a lot of theft involved. There's a lot of artificial gatekeeping involved, permissioning involved, and things like that, which are completely against natural law. What Bitcoin does is it takes sort of that power of stealing from everybody that central banks and really all kinds of banks have from the people. And that is very interesting because that's been the engine of government growth, of government spending, of inequality in many ways all over the world. So when I think about Bitcoin, it's really like when I argue about it from a Christian context, I'm arguing much more about it being fair money, right? Just money, instead of unfair money and unjust money. And that seems to have connected with a lot of people because they're seeing the moral argument for Bitcoin rather than sort of the investment case for Bitcoin. And I think that's what I tried to bring about with that book, Thank God for Bitcoin, is it's not just an investment, right? It's a better system. And there's a reason why a lot of people are getting into this system. It's so that they can avoid all the excesses and the badness of the current system. And that's, I think, a much stronger argument. Now, with regard to faith and how those things are aligned, I mean, I did give a talk earlier today about virtues and vices of Bitcoin. I think one of the virtues is faith. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that just refuse to believe, despite all evidence. And then there are people that are so gullible that they'll believe anything, right? That other things are the equivalent of Bitcoin. And faith is sort of like that midpoint, the balance. And unfortunately, the people that are on either side are often driven by envy of the people that got in earlier, and it's for them some form of a status game. So it's the willingness to just be humble and recognize reality and do what's beneficial for you instead of willing some other reality that isn't true. Unfortunately, a lot of people do fall into that. So there is that aspect of it where if you are very honest with yourself, instead of having a postmodern nihilistic mindset where you think you can make your own reality and either be on the unbelief side and sort of dismiss Bitcoin and say that it's worth nothing because I declare it to be, or be on the gullible side where you're trying to will an altcoin into prominence through your marketing efforts or something like that, that it's some arbitrary coin that will win. Neither of those are correct. Like there are certain properties of Bitcoin that make it better than all the other stuff, namely decentralization. And recognizing that and just sort of not trying to play this weird status game where reality is the thing that you distort, instead letting reality be, recognizing reality and submitting to that, I think is at the heart of having a correct view of Bitcoin.
As a developer and a person of faith, do you see a significant divide between these two aspects of life, or do you believe they can coexist harmoniously?
I mean, for most of history, those two things were always combined. I mean, you look at somebody like Isaac Newton, he was a very religious man. He saw no conflict between religion and science. And really, that is more a product of the Enlightenment era, where the people that were pro-Enlightenment, sort of denying God, tried to claim science for themselves, even though historically that hadn't been the case. The most fervent or the people that had the most to contribute to science were often very religious, and for good reason. There's a reason why these things exist. You have to believe that there's regularity in nature, and if you don't believe in God, then that's hard to justify. Why should nature have some regularity or some laws to discover, unless you believe in a lawgiver of some kind? So I don't see at all a contradiction between those two things. And in fact, I consider myself a very technical person. And when I think about Christianity, I think of it very technically, right? Like, what is the logic here? And if you read older Christian arguments and things like that, they're extremely rational. It's actually atheism that is brain twisting and rationalizing and jumping to conclusions and things like that, at least in my view. And having studied some of that, like you can read somebody like Thomas Aquinas, right? 13th century, he wrote Summa Theologica, and it's taking a steel man of what an atheist would say and just destroying those arguments, like through logic, through point by point. And this Enlightenment fiction that these two things are like completely separate is completely wrong. And unfortunately, that still persists to this day, because they want to claim that mantle of rationality and science, even though it doesn't belong to them.
Do you believe Bitcoin has been unfairly characterized as a cult by mainstream media, or do you think there's merit to this perspective?
No, I mean, I suppose it looks like it maybe on the outside, and honestly, for people on the outside that are looking into Bitcoin and they go, okay, well, these people are not acting like the other fiat people. Yeah, I can see why they'd be a little suspicious. I mean, Bitcoiners are having way more babies. Bitcoiners are thinking way more about the future. Bitcoiners are, doing things that are not exactly popular in the fiat world. But in a sense, we should really be asking, okay, like, is it fiat that's more cultish? Because historically, people have had no problems having lots of children. But it's the fiat world that has the really hugely reduced birth rates and even marriage rates at this point. What's going on? Historically, that's not been a problem. Why is that now a problem? So really, it's people inside a cult asking people outside a cult if the other people are in a cult. So I get why they would ask that, but they're so used to the fiat mentality that they see Bitcoiners having children, and it's like, okay, like something's wrong with these people. And it seems sort of like inverted, that a way of thinking for me.
Would you say that Bitcoin fosters its own form of religion or a belief system among its proponents?
I wouldn't say it's religiosity. What I see most is that Bitcoiners have hope, right? And the people outside are like, why do you have hope, right? Because I mean, if you saw during the pandemic, the only people that seemed to be doing well were Bitcoiners. And I don't know if you noticed that, but a lot of my normie friends, the people that were not in Bitcoin, they were deeply depressed, and they were in the pits of despair about everything. And it's like, how can we ever get out of this? This is just horrible. And for them, like they see Bitcoiners have hope. It's like, oh, that must be a cult, or they must be, fanatics or something like that. No, it's actually like we see a path out of this, right? It's not just government taking over everything and gaslighting you and all that. There's actually a path out. Like there is a way to sort of take off the mask a little bit from, I guess that's a pun there, from all the people that are sort of gaslighting you and so on. And that I think is what maybe gets them get them to say, okay, these people are maybe religious or whatever, because they see hope, right? And that's something, honestly, that a lot of Fiat people don't have, right? The world sort of traffics in like deep despair, right? There are a lot of people that are afraid to say almost anything because they'll get in trouble, or if they say something now that's acceptable now, but 5 years from now it's like completely unacceptable, they're going to get in trouble or canceled or whatever. Like that's a deep despair when you think your position is completely insecure and that you can get canceled at any time. Whereas Bitcoiners, for the most part, have sort of like detached themselves from the system, and they understand, okay, like I'm sovereign over my stuff. I don't have to care what all of these people think or all the gaslighting that they're doing to me and so on. So it's not that we're religious, it's that we actually have hope. And it's just so rare in the world today to have hope that it stands out as, oh, okay, like these people must be crazy or something, when in fact, actually, we're the rational ones. We see a path, and it's not fantasy either, right? It's not like just, oh, everything's going to work out because we just want it to be or something like that. There's good evidence that Bitcoin is working. And the fact that Bitcoiners are having children, they're successful, they're able to withstand a lot of these attacks from the mainstream and so on, that's evidence that it's not fantasy. It's not just, altcoin marketing or whatever. It's actually like real. And that I think should be compelling evidence, if anything, that there's something very interesting going on in this community, and it's not cultish, it's not some sort of new religion or anything like that. It's just like there's a different perspective on money, and unfortunately the fiat monetary system puts you into a pit of despair once you understand it. But for those of us in Bitcoin, we see actually a way out.
What do you mean when you describe Bitcoin as encouraging the biblical model of sowing and reaping? Additionally, could you elaborate on the idea that Bitcoin is Christian money?
Yeah, so sowing and reaping is sort of like the natural process, right? You sow a seed first, and then it grows, and you can reap the rewards, the fruit, or whatever. And that's just sort of the natural order. And from a Christian biblical perspective, that's something that is mentioned over and over and over again. It's, you first sow, and then you reap. What fiat money does is it flips that on its head. So through loans, through debt created out of nothing, you can reap first and then pay it off later over time. And this has been the fiat model, is by issuing these loans, instead of having to save, you can just sort of have the savings first and then pay it off later through the profits and so on. Now, it sounds good in theory, and if that you don't have to save or spend all that time like earning all that money so that you can try for something. But in practice, it doesn't work out that way, because the people that take out the loans don't necessarily know how to spend that money very well, because they didn't have to go through that, sowing and cultivating all of that, the act of saving. They haven't had to go through that. So they can often be very wasteful with that money, and then having to pay off something that didn't work out is honestly kind of dehumanizing. You're essentially in slavery, in debt slavery, while you're paying it off. And that causes a lot of bitterness, and any parent knows this, right, with their child. Is it better for you to get them the toy that they want now and make them pay it off later through chores in the house, or to do it in the other direction, make them do chores in the house or whatever, and then pay them, and then when they've saved enough, then they can get that toy? What's better for the child? Well, obviously the latter, because they learn how to save and work for something that they want, instead of getting what they want right away and then sort of paying it off. But this is the fiat model. And this is why I say that that model is actually quite unbiblical, and it reverses everything. Whereas all of the original way, which is sowing and then reaping, having some sort of savings vehicle that lets you accumulate, and then you can go do something that you want with it. That's the right model, and that's I think why I say it's biblical money.
Don't you think statements like this might make people who don't share your values or views feel excluded or alienated?
If they don't like they don't have to listen to me. And if their impression is based on my speaking, sorry, I'm me. I'm not going to speak for the Bitcoin community. I don't think anyone can. But it's based on this sort of fiat model where one person sort of represents everything about the community. And we know Bitcoin's not like that. There are lots of different opinions on how to do anything, really. And I'm just one person that's giving my perspective. And if they don't like it, that's okay. There are lots of other perspectives. You should try to figure out which one's the correct one if you're being intellectually honest. But if they feel excluded because of something I say, sorry. I mean, that's just going to happen, like, no matter who says what, if you just disagree with them. So I don't feel at all bad saying things that I believe. If they don't like it, that's okay. I'm okay with disagreement. I'm okay with people not liking what I say. I get that all the time, actually. But, like, there's no need for some sort of consensus opinion on that. This isn't the Bitcoin protocol.
Do you believe Bitcoin aligns exclusively with Christianity, or do you see it as compatible with other belief systems and values as well?
I mean, you'd have to ask them. I know it's fit into my life, and I'm a Christian. I haven't been a Muslim or, Jewish or, Hindu or whatever, so I can't speak to that. You should go ask those people. I suspect the answer is yes, but, like, for me to comment on that would be like trying to represent a community that I'm not a part of. I just know that for Christians, it's definitely aligning with the values that we hold dear.